Hi, this is Kevin Trainer, and I'd like to welcome you to my tutorial on coding DTD schemas for XML documents that have the style of data interchange. Okay, if you've been following along with my tutorials, you'll know that I'm recording these for my XML for Libraries course at UWM, but I'm expecting that some other people might find their way here on YouTube as well. And you're welcome to join us. So here we are. We're learning how to code DTDs. This is the first one we're learning how to do. And the typical use case, well, there actually are two typical use cases where you're working from a DTD or to a DTD. One is when somebody's already created the tag set, there is a DTD, and you need to author an XML document that conforms to the DTD, a so-called XML instance document. And that's not what we're doing here. But it turns out that that one's pretty easy to do because most XML-aware editors have a lot of entry helpers that will give you hints as to where elements and attributes can occur within the document. And we'll learn how to use those over the rest of the course. But a more typical situation when you're learning how to code a DTD is that you've been given a sample XML document that sort of has implicit in it a developed tag set, but you don't have a corresponding DTD file to act as the schema. And what you want to do is you want to go through the example document and use it as a guide to creating the DTD schema, and that's what we're going to do. So it turns out that this time we're going to be working with a sample document that comes from, this is kind of interesting. Let's see if we can find out where this is coming from. That's not where we want to be. So back on documents, we're sure to make it. So courseware development, find our course, find the tutorials, DTDs for data interchange, and here's a starter file. Okay, so we've opened it up. The data that we're working with here is a file that I created by reading the website of the student chapters portion of the ASIST organization. So what we're doing is we're coming up with a partial list of ASIS student chapters, their advisors, their websites, those kinds of things. And I picked a small sample so we can, I picked one that was going to be useful for creating the DTD, but not so long that we were having to navigate through the document too much. Okay. And it includes the chapter at UWM, where I'm teaching this course, and at the University of Illinois, where I teach other courses, because they're my favorites. And some others just because they're recognizable iSchools. So here is the document, and I've created it as a starter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, as a result, I'm going to add a Doctype declaration to the file that's going to point to the DTD schema file. So I'm going to want to save it under a new name. So I'm just going to go up to the menu, click on File, Save As. And the bulk of the name that we're using is going to be fine. It's called Student Assist Chapters Partial. Okay, and I recorded this list about a year ago now, back in February 2015. Okay, so right now we don't have any DTD at all. So we need to create a DTD file, because although you will see people who will create an internal DTD within an XML document, normally they do that when they are developing the DTD, and they only do it kind of temporarily. And they do it because it's convenience to not have to go from file to file. When you have a tool like the Oxygen XML editor, it's very easy to pop from the XML instance document to the DTD file. So there's no reason to have an internal DTD. So we are going to create a DTD. We're going to go up to the menu, click and say File, New. And I'm not going to take advantage of the recently used because you might not have them in that list, but I'm going to go to the sublist for New Document. And I'm looking for document type definition. That's pretty close to the top of the list. Document type definition. And I'm going to click on Create. And for some reason, this editor always starts out the DTD with an XML declaration. And I can only imagine that there's a reason why our good friends at Synchrosoft believe that it's good style to put a DTD declaration at, an XML declaration at the beginning of a DTD file. I just want to point out that even though that might be helpful, this is not an XML document per se, because the DTD language is not formed from an XML tag set, but rather it's formed from an SGML tag set. And so I'm going to get rid of the XML declaration because I think it's kind of confusing. It probably does help the product deal with things like encoding schemes and all that. But since we're going to use pretty standard encoding schemes, we're not going to have to worry. Okay? So what's the first thing that we're going to have? Well, we're going to have some kind of element declaration, okay, for the root element. Okay, so what's the root? Let's look back. Well, it looks like it's chapters. So we have a root element called chapters, two attributes on that: source, which looks like it holds a URL, and as of, which looks like it holds a standard ISO date. And then within chapters are multiple occurrences of the element chapter, and it looks like that's it. I've got about 6 of them or so. Okay, so chapter contains chapters, and chapters contains multiple occurrences of chapter. And then within that, we've got chapter name, school web URL, advisor, and some other things that are slightly different depending upon the instance that we look at within the document. And that's going to be some of the challenge of creating the DTD. So let's start out by having something for chapters. So let's go over to the DTD. And I see it's untitled, so why don't we save it? File, save as, and I'm going to call this student assist chapters.dtd. Okay. All right, that looks good. And how do we start the DTD? Well, we need some kind of declaration. So we're going to use an element declaration. Okay. And it's put in sort of the shell of an element declaration. And the name of the element is chapters. Okay. And you'll probably remember from the lecture that the content specification goes in parentheses. Okay. And we want to come up with the content specification for chapters, and it's multiple occurrences of chapter. So we're going to say chapter. Okay. And now the question is, are we going to say that we have to have at least one, or are we going to say that we could have 0? And I'm going to say here, even though the last time I did this, I can see that I used the plus symbol here to say, well, we're always going to have at least one. What I usually do is the opposite of that. And I usually put the asterisk here that says we're going to have 0 to many chapter elements that are children of one root, that is chapters. Okay. Now, if we click on the validate toolbar icon, we will see that it's possible to validate a DTD, even though we're not validating in a true XML parser sense of validating. The Oxygen XML editor allows you to use the validate toolbar icon in most of the editors, and what it will do is it will check the syntax. Now we see a warning that the content model of element chapters refers to the undeclared element chapter. All right, well, we haven't gotten there yet, so that one's okay. So how do we hook this up? Well, we're going to hook this up by coding a Doctype declaration, which comes after the XML declaration and before the root. This is going to go right here on line 2. And I find it a little bit hard from time to time to remember exactly how I type this. So what I do is I go up to the menu and I click on Document. Okay. And then I go to Schema. And then there's a drop down for Associate Schema. And I can go looking for the schema, which I saved in the same directory. So I could pick student assist chapters.dtd. That's good. And I'm going to click the open button. Okay. I'm going to say use path relative to file location. So what we're just going to get is just the name of the DTD because it's in the same directory. Schema type DTD, public ID, it doesn't have a public ID. So let's say OK. And look what we got. Well, I got an extra blank line, but it has coded for me a Doctype declaration. Right after Doctype, the first character string there, chapters, says that the root element of this document is going to be the chapters element. And if you look, that's the one we used, so that worked out fine. The system keyword says that you'll find the DTD not internal to this XML document, but in a system file. And the value that's in the quote marks there is it's just the URL for the file. And because the file is in the same directory as the XML document, we don't have any path expression because we're not going across the net. We don't have a classic HTTP URL kind of address. We just have the name and the extension of the file, student ASYS chapters.dtd. Okay? Now, if this is properly hooked up, we should be able to click on the Validate button. And we'll see that we have a problem, and the problem says that the attribute source is not allowed to appear in the element chapters. Well, that's good because we know that we have connected to the DTD. If we didn't properly connect to the DTD, we'd have another error. Let's just put an X in front of the name of the DTD file and save that and try to validate again. And it says essentially that it can't find, file not found exception. So it can't find the DTD file. Okay, well, let's undo that. So we've undone that and saved that. And click on the validation icon again. And we see a list of the complaints about the match between the XML document and the DTD. Okay, well, those are not all going to go away until we're finished with the DTD. But at least now we have them connected. Okay, so let's work on what I typically do is I get all the elements correct, and then I go back and add the attributes. Okay, so how would I do that? Well, so far I've got chapters, and now I have to have the declaration for chapter. Let's say what's in chapter. Well, so far chapter name, school web URL, advisor. Okay. Let's go add those. So let's add a declaration for chapter. Right? And again, what's the content specification? Well, chapter name, school web URL, advisor. So let's just look. Chapter name, school web URL, advisor. Okay. Now, let's just look at those and say if those are mandatory, or whether they might be optional, or whether they might occur more than one time. So let's look. We have a chapter name in each of our instances. So chapter name looks like it's mandatory. Very good. Okay. School web URL. Okay, we have it in the first one, have it in the second, have it in the third, have it in the fourth, have it in the fifth, have it in the sixth. Okay. So school web URL looks like it's mandatory as well. And you will recall that we don't need to put any character at the end of the name if it's mandatory, if it's required. Okay, let's look at the next one. Well, the next one is advisor. I'm sorry. I see that some of them have another element. The first one goes from school web URL right to advisor, but look at the second one. It goes from school web URL onto chapter web URL. So maybe we have another element to add, chapter web URL, chapter web URL. Okay, and chapter web URL, as we've seen before, let's just go back and look at the XML document. It's missing in the first chapter, present in the second. So that means it's optional. And we remember now that the way that we say something is optional is we go to the end of that element name and we put a question mark there. Okay, now let's think about advisor. How many of those do we have? Well, up at the top, chapter 1 has one advisor. Chapter 2 has an advisor and an alternate advisor. We haven't gotten to that yet. Okay, we're going to have to deal with alternate advisor as well. The third one has 2 advisors, so it looks like we need at least one advisor and maybe more. So 1 or more advisors. It looks like alternate advisor is optional. Okay. And then go down to the last couple. We've got an advisor and an advisor. Okay, so let's go try to reflect that in the rules. So advisor, it looks like we need at least one. So we're going to use the plus to say one to many. And then we're going to have alternate advisor. And we saw that we only have one of those, so that must be optional. Okay, so that looks good. Now, do any of those have sub-elements? Yes, some of them do. But before we do that, we have to remember that putting the names of the elements in the content model of the parent, which is a chapter, is only half the job. The next thing we have to do is we have to create an element declaration for each of those. Now, if we go back and look, except for advisor and alternate advisor, the inside of these things are plain text. Okay, so chapter name, school web URL, chapter web URL, these things are all plain text. Okay, so how do we declare those? Well, we get a little entry help here, element, and let's just put the name X here because we're going to copy this a couple times. Okay, and we're going to say that the specification, the content model is # capital PC data. Okay, and that means plain old XML text. So we're going to need 1, 2, 3 of those. So let's copy that 2 more times. Okay, so copy that. Copy it again, and let's use the real names for the elements. First one's going to be chapter name. Whoa. Capitalization is important here. So chapter name in mixed case. School web URL. And chapter web URL. Whoa. Capitalization counts. Okay, so we've got those. And now we've done just about everything except advisor and alternate advisor. And if we go back and look, we'll see that these have sub-elements. Okay, they do. So advisor has the sub-elements name and email in the first 2 instances. In the second one, we have my good friend Stephen J. Stephen Downey down at Illinois. he hasn't provided his email. So it looks like name is required, but email is optional. The third one here at University of Wisconsin-Madison has a name, TBA, to be announced. So it looks like name's required, but certainly not email. And then the last one here at UWM is Iris, and she has her email as well. Okay, so it looks like name required, email optional. Very good. So let's go and create a declaration for advisor. So advisor, and the content model is going to be name. It's just plain name because it's required, comma, email, and because that's optional, we're going to follow that with a question mark. Okay, and as long as we're here, let's do the same for alternate advisor. So how would we do that? Well, I'm just gonna copy. Well, let me undo all that mess. I'm just going to copy the text for the declaration of advisor and down to the next line, and I'm going to make that alternate advisor. So they have the same content spec. And I did that because I happen to know, since I designed the tag set, that I designed them the same way. We could have looked for the evidence of that in the sample document. Okay, so we have the content model of both advisor and alternate advisor, and now we need to declare the elements name and email. So let's add those. So we have a declaration for name, and you won't be surprised to know that it's plain old #PC data. And it's going to be the same thing for email. So that's going to be plain old #PC data. And here we're getting pretty close. So I'm going to save the text in the DTD file, and I'm going to go back and look at the text in the XML file. And you'll notice that this file, because of the automatic validity checking that's been turned on, is lit up like a Christmas tree with all these red marks that things are not valid. And that's because the last time we validated it, we had really very little text in the DTD. And so you can see we have these squiggly red underlines on almost all of the elements, saying that they're not what we were expecting. And then over in the right gutter area here, at the very top, we see a red square, and that really indicates that we've had a validation failure. And then underneath, we have a red rectangle for each place in the document that has a validation error. And if we had a long document, well, this is a little bit longer than the page, we just have to pick a rectangle and we click on it, and we will go to that place within the document. And this this information bar over on the right side is really helpful when you're having validation problems and you want to be able to find them within the document. Okay, so let's go up to the toolbar and click on the validate checkmark icon again. And as we can see in the right column, we've lost a lot of the errors. We still have errors. So let's look at what we've got. Well, just about everything that's underlined is an attribute. So the two attributes on chapter haven't been taken care of yet. On chapters, the one element on chapter hasn't been taken care of. And that's it. So we need to declare some attributes. You will also see that we have some underlines for spell checking. And you can also see, so for instance, we passed a spell check on Jean-Francois, but Blanchette did not pass the spell check. But if you really look at the red underline there, it's a straight line of red dots, where if you look at the underline that's under this, chapter type equals student text down in the next grouping, you can see that that red line is squiggly. And so the squiggly one is a gentle reminder that we have a validation error. And the straight line is a gentle reminder that we have a spell check error. And as long as we have the spell check here, you can add words to the dictionary, and I often do. So we can come over Blanchette and right click. And well, I don't think we did it quite right, but if we just hover over it, perhaps it'll work. Well, let's highlight it and right click. I'm not seeing it. There is a way to add it to the dictionary. I think we might have to wait for it to come up on its own, which it's not doing. A watch pot never boils. Okay, so let's go to our DTD and let's add a couple of these attributes. Okay, so the first one is the source attribute on chapters, and then the second one is as of on chapters. So let's add those two. So let's go to DTD, and I am going to put this attribute list for chapters immediately after the element declaration for chapters. Now, does it have to be here? No, the DTD language is very flexible, so you can really sort all the declarations like a deck of cards. But it's good practice to put the attribute list immediately after the declaration of the element to which it applies. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to create an at list. Okay. And we're going to create a blank line here. And each of the attributes, it's going to have the name of the attribute. Okay. So in this case, it's going to be source. It's going to have the type, and it's going to have whether it's required or implied. And you may remember from the lecture that implied means optional. So we're going to say that this is required. So the name of the attribute is source. The type is CData. Okay. And that's just like PC data, # PC data. It's this normal old text. And we're going to say # required. Okay. And then let's separate that with a comma. And then let's go to the second one. And what was the second one? The second one is as of. So as of. And I'd like to get these to match up if we can. And then we can say required. And then most people would, I think, have the closing tag happen right after required. The attribute type is required, so let's just give this a check. I think that the only thing I've done is given us an extra comma. So let's see if that's it. Oh, I'm sorry. I never said that this was for chapters. How about that? There we are. So at list for chapters, that's how we link to the element. And then we say of the name of the attribute, the type, whether it's required, # required, or optional, # implied. Okay, we don't separate the entries for each of the attributes with the comma, although that would have been nice syntactically. We don't. But we do, as a practice, put them on separate lines. So here we've done that. Now let's save this. Okay. Now let's go back to our XML document where we're getting underlining for both source and as of. And let's validate it again with the checkmark icon. And we're expecting those two to go away, and they did go away. So it's liking those two. Now the complaints all seem to be about chapter type on the chapter element. Okay. So let's go take a look at that. So we can do this. Where's the chapter element? Well, it's right down here. So let's say that this has a declaration that's an at list. Okay. And let's remember to put the name of the element in here again. And let's say that, what was it? Type or chapter type? Chapter type. Chapter type. And let's say it's type C data. And let's say it's required. Okay. Well, let's give that a look. So we saved that. I'm going to click on the validation checkmark icon again, which is really not validating the DTD because, again, DTDs are not XML per se. They're written in the DTD language. But in this tool, in the Oxygen XML editor, when we click on the checkmark icon, it will do some validity checking based upon the content that we have in front of us. And here, it's going to do error checking of the DTD. And if we look down at the bottom, it says document is valid, which means we don't have any syntax errors in the DTD. And also, you also get over on the right-hand side along the gutter, at the very top, you've got the green square. And of course, we don't have any red rectangles as we go down because we don't have any errors. So let's go back to the XML document. And as you can see over on the right side of this, the last time we validated it, we have a red square at the top for invalid and a lot of red rectangles for really every place we have that chapter type equals student attribute. So let's click on the checkmark icon again. And guess what? We have a valid document. And how do we know that? Well, we look down at the bottom in the bar, document is valid, and we look over at the top right, and we've got a green block there too. So all those things have worked just like we wanted. So as long as we're here and we're dealing with attributes, we're going to do something just a little fancier for the chapter type attribute that's on the chapter element. And that's this. It is possible, even using the DTD version of schemas, it's possible to control the values that are allowed in attributes. And the way that we do this is with a declaration within the out list of an enumeration. So we enumerate the proper values. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, we can say this. Instead of CData, okay, we can put a list of the allowed values. So one we know is student, okay, and then we say space, use that OR bar, which on my keyboard is over, on the PC keyboard, it's over above the enter key. It's an uppercase backslash. So student, and let's say we can have a student chapter and we can have a regular chapter. Okay, so those are the two. And let's say that it's required. Okay, so that looks good. Check that as proper. Check that for proper values. Okay, and then let's go over to the document and let's check it. So that's fine. So just here's the thing that I like to do when I've put in something like an enumeration to allow specific attribute values. Well, I've got one that says student. Let's create another one that says regular. Okay, and I would expect that to validate okay. But something else, let's say if it didn't have any value in it, I would expect that to not validate. And we're already getting an indicator with the red squiggly line that that's true. So let's save that and try to validate it again. It says it must have a value from the list student and regular. Okay, and let's try the word Fido, the name of my old faithful hound. And again, I don't think that's going to validate either. No, it says with value Fido must have a value from the list student and regular. And let's go back and put it to what it's supposed to be with our real data, which is student, and you can see that error clear. Okay, now what a lot of people think of here is that they see that feature for controlling the value of attributes, and they say, wow, I'd really like to have that feature for the value of sub-element content. And that's how a lot of people felt when they were introduced to the DTD language in the early days of XML. And that's one of the use cases that gave rise to the development of the W3C XML schema language. So pretty soon we're going to be learning the W3C XML schema language, in which you not only can constrain the values of attributes, but you can constrain the values of elements as well. Okay? But we're not there yet. We're on the original schema feature for XML, which is DTDs. So here we are. Let's just take convince ourselves again that we have a totally valid document. So let me get rid of the old errors. Click on the validation icon again, and it says it's valid. And let's go back to the DTD, and we can see that that looks good. Click on the validate icon here, which is going to check its syntax for proper DTD language, and that gets us a green as well. And the only other really important thing that I haven't recently pointed out is we have connected the XML instance document with the DTD with a doctype statement that points to an external DTD, one that's not contained in the XML document itself. And because it uses the keyword system, we know it's external. And because we don't point to any other directory or any other machine across the internet, we know that the DTD file is supposed to be in the same directory as the XML file itself. And in fact, it is. So we've got good results here, and I'm going to leave you to do similar exercises on your own, and I'll say bye until next time. Bye-bye.